and welcome to the very first episode of Concert Insights, Schubert Club's new online version of the traditional pre-concert talk. My name is Mark Bilyeu, and I'm thrilled to join you for the 2023-2024 Maud Moon Weyerhaeuser Sanborn International Artist Series, which opens with the rock star musicians of pianist Jean-Yves Thibaudet, violinist Lisa Batiashvili, and cellist Gautier Capuçon, playing some of the most iconic and thrilling piano trios in the canon. We are really leaning into the pre-aspect of these pre-concert events and sharing them with you, the concert goer, before you even get to the Ordway. We hope in doing this, you'll be able to enjoy these talks and conversations from the comfort of your own home, and perhaps with a beverage of your choice, although I will personally miss the Ordway coffee. First on the program is a trio by Haydn. This is, in fact, the 44th work for these forces that Haydn published, out of 45 in total. We don't know exactly when it was written, though scholars do believe it was during or shortly after his famous second visit to London in 1794 and 95, when he was already a rock star himself. And we certainly don't know when it was premiered, because chamber music in Haydn's time was not intended for public consumption. By definition, chamber music is for a chamber, a living room, a reading room, or a parlor, not for a public gathering, and Haydn certainly never anticipated his piano trios to be heard in grand spaces like the Ordway. This is much different than his string quartets written around the same time, which were specifically written for the best players of London's biggest stages. Piano trios in the 18th century were written for the best amateurs, which, by the way, it appears as though the gap between amateur and professional was pretty small. And because they were written for and dedicated to amateurs, we can gain insights into these musicians' strengths and abilities. The trio heard on this program is one of 6 trios dedicated to the pianist Therese Janssen, who was a pupil of Muzio Clementi and was considered an amateur, not because she lacked skill, but frankly, because she was a woman in that era. She was listed in a contemporary encyclopedia as one of Clementi's top 3 students, the other 2 being men, John Field and Johann Baptist Kramer. Despite this published distinction, we know very little about Therese Janssen's career. There are very few accounts of public performances, which lead many musicologists to believe that she built her fame through private house concerts. Haydn himself recognized the skill of Therese Janssen, having encountered her playing on his first London visit, and shortly after, he dedicated several solo piano sonatas to her, including both the famous number 50 in C major and number 52 in E flat. The two became personal friends. Here we see that Haydn was even the signatory on the marriage license between Therese Janssen and her husband, the artist and engraver Gaetano Bartolozzi. Now, we know that Haydn loved a good joke, and Therese Janssen played a part in one of his favorites to tell at dinner parties. In London, there was a very accomplished amateur violinist who had exceptional technique until he got into the higher registers, nearing the bridge of the violin. Haydn apparently tried to cure this man of his weakness. According to Haydn's biographer, Albert Christopher Diaz, this man often visited a Miss J, who we understand to be Therese Janssen, a pianist of considerable ability with whom he was in the habit of playing. Without saying a word to anyone, Haydn composed a sonata for piano and violin, called it Jacob's Dream, and sent it through trusted hands, sealed and unsigned, to Miss J, who did not wait long before trying over the sonata, to all appearances an easy one with her friend. What Haydn had foreseen then came to pass. The amateur broke down on the high notes where the passage work was overloaded. Miss J, guessing that the unknown author had Jacob's ladder in mind, no sooner noticed how her partner was climbing up and down, now awkwardly and unsteadily, now reeling and skipping, that she was so diverted by the business that she could no longer conceal her amusement. The amateur, meanwhile, cursed the composer and confidently asserted that he knew nothing about writing for the violin. 5 or 6 months later, when the authorship of the sonata came to light, Miss J rewarded Haydn with a present. It's a real 18th century dad joke, you know. The piano trios of Haydn can often get a bad rap. They are nearly always piano works with supporting string parts, and often cellists are given the even more thankless job of doubling the piano's bass line. This isn't necessarily because Haydn and his predecessors disliked the cello, which was so often utilized as a continuo instrument. It was simply because the pianos of Haydn's day required reinforcements. The bass was often thin and weak, and the sustaining power was pretty poor. So the addition of a resonant bass, plus the singing nature of the violin, was in many ways an artistic solution to a mechanical problem. And, let's not forget, chamber music was meant for homes. So trios often provided opportunities to invite friends over to make music together. It's sometimes easy to forget today that the keyboards in the 18th and 19th century were in near state of constant adaptation and innovation. Make a plan to visit the Schubert Club's newly renovated and reimagined museum. Their historical keyboard collection is an incredible resource when it comes to better understanding how the instruments of the day informed the composers writing for them. In their collection is an instrument built by Broadwood in 1795. Here's a brief work by John Field. Remember, he was one of Clementi's other top 3 students, alongside Therese Janssen, played on that 1795 Broadwood, which would have likely been very similar to what Therese had first played that Haydn trio on. Next up on the program is the groundbreaking Ravel piano trio. Now, unlike Haydn, who churned out chamber music like it was going out of style, chamber music is never going out of style, Ravel's contributions to the catalog are small in number, but huge in stature. Ravel had been planning to write a trio for at least 6 years before beginning work in earnest in March of 1914. At the outset, Ravel remarked to his pupil Maurice Delange, "I've written my trio. Now all I need are the themes." Ravel found it difficult to compose in Paris, due in large part to his unrelenting social life. So he often made trips to Saint-Jean-de-Luz, a small town on the Bay of Biscay in the southwestern part of France, in the Basque country, just a few miles from the Spanish border. He was not born far from there, in Ciborne, and although he was a Parisian through and through, he felt very comfortable on the coast and was able to accomplish a lot of composing while he was there. In the spring of 1914, as a world war was feeling unavoidable, Ravel traveled back to Saint-Jean-de-Luz. For years, he had been sketching a piano concerto that utilized themes from the Basque country, and he hoped to finish this alongside a new piano trio. While the concerto on Basque themes never really fully took shape, Ravel began crafting his trio, borrowing on the concerto's themes. As his friend and confidant Roland Manuel wrote, "Our great musicians have never been ashamed of admiring a pretty tune from a cafe concert. It is said that it was in watching ice cream vendors dancing a fandango at Saint-Jean-de-Luz that Ravel picked up the first theme of his trio in A. A theme which he believed to be Basque, but wasn't. Whether he heard the opening theme in a cafe or not, the rhythm he employed was certainly Basque. A publication by Charles Borde of 12 love songs from Basque country would have certainly been known to Ravel. Take a look here at one of those 12, titled Nightingale, Come Over Here With Me. See how this rhythm groups 8 eighth notes as 3, 2, and another 3. It sounds like this. Now, look at Ravel's opening line of his trio. See how he uses the same rhythmic groupings of 3, 2, 3, but adds complexity to it with the use of dotted rhythms. Throughout the course of the summer, Ravel's creativity stalled. In a letter to Madame Casella, the wife of the pianist who would later premiere the work, Ravel wrote, "In spite of the fine weather, for the last 3 weeks the trio has made no progress, and I'm disgusted with it. Today, however, I have decided that it is not too nauseating, and the carburetor is now repaired." A month later, France's involvement in the war was now inevitable, and Ravel found a new energy. France entered into the war on August 3rd of 1914, and Ravel's deep patriotism moved him to finish the work so that he could enlist in the army. Several times he shared with friends his concern that this trio would become a posthumous work, receiving its premiere after his own death from the war. A few days after the French entrance, Ravel wrote again to Maurice Deslanges, saying, "Yes, I am working on the trio with an insane certainty and lucidity, but during this time the blues are at work too, and suddenly I find myself sobbing over sharps and flats. This has been going on for 4 days, since the Tocsin." Another month passed, and Ravel was still in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. He wrote to his friend and biographer, Roland Manuel again, saying, "As you can imagine, it's frightfully calm here. I have never worked so much and so rapidly as this summer, particularly after the mobilization. In 5 weeks, I accomplished the work of 5 months. I wanted to finish my trio before going to enlist, and was disappointed to be found underweight by 2 kilograms. I'm not counting on the general examination of those previously rejected for military service, and if I don't succeed again, I'll try to finagle something when I return to Paris. They'll surely end up being touched by the elegance of my body." That same day, he wrote a letter to Igor Stravinsky, saying, "Do let me have news of you. What is happening to you in the middle of all this? Edouard, Ravel's brother, has joined up as a dispatch writer. I haven't been so lucky. They don't want me, but I am pinning my hopes on the new medical examination that all those who have been rejected will have to pass, and on the strings I may be able to pull. The idea that I should be leaving at once made me get through 5 months' work in 5 weeks. My trio is finished. In October of 1914, he was accepted as a nurse's aide by the Army, and in March of 1916, he became a volunteer truck driver for the 13th Artillery Regiment. Here we see 2 photos of Ravel in his service attire. The second photo, his truck driving uniform, he described to singer Jan Bathory as, quote, a poilu, dressed in goatskin with helmet and gas mask, who drives on forbidding roads, even into the midst of the gigantic struggle. Now, before he donned his goatskin, the trio had its premiere in Paris at the Salle Javot on January 28th of 1915. The trio's premiere was unremarkable, and the war was overshadowing nearly everything else. Ravel was not present, but not for the reasons he had originally feared. He was not dead, but instead supremely focused on passing the Army's medical examinations. Ravel would go on to serve his country until 1917, when various ailments led to a conditional discharge, at which time he was described as depressed, thin, and suffering from neurasthenia. The war, as they say, changed everything, and Ravel did not escape this. He continued to write music after his service, most notably his Tambour de Couperin, which he dedicated to friends who did not survive the war. The trio, dedicated to his former teacher André Guédalge, with its Basque-inspired rhythms, its shifting modal harmonies, and its shocking technical demands, stands as the last work Ravel wrote before everything changed. In 1832, only 80 years before France entered into World War I, a 22-year-old Felix Mendelssohn made a trip to Paris. While there, he wrote to his sister, Fanny, answering her questions about upcoming publications. I consider that to see Paris is at this moment my chief vocation, he said. The publishers, too, are standing on each side of me like veritable Satans, demanding music for the piano, and offering to pay for it. By heavens, I don't know whether I shall be able to withstand this, or write some kind of trio. For I hope you believe me to be superior to the temptation of a potpourri, but I should like to compose a couple of good trios. Mendelssohn was intent on advancing the format to give all musicians more active roles within the trio. But as a pianist himself, he was especially interested in elevating the piano's contributions. Since the time of Haydn, only 50 years earlier, the trio had moved from parlors into concert halls, and Mendelssohn was always writing with the public and professional performers in mind. In the drafting process, Mendelssohn played his trio in D minor for his friend and colleague, the composer Ferdinand Hiller, who was staying with the Mendelssohns in Leipzig at the time. Hiller was impressed, but had, according to him, one small misgiving. Certain pianoforte passages in it, constructed on broken chords, seemed to me, to speak candidly, somewhat old-fashioned. It's important to know that in the 1830s, listomania had taken Europe by storm, and the florid, delicate, yet virtuosic piano music of Frédéric Chopin was also at the front of everyone's minds. Hiller knew both these composer-pianists and admitted that he was thoroughly accustomed to the richness of passages which marked the new pianoforte school. So, as Hiller recounted, his usual conscientious earnestness when once he had made up his mind, Mendelssohn undertook the length and rewrote the whole pianoforte part. It was this revised version that premiered at the Leipzig Gewandhaus on February 1st of 1840, featuring some of Mendelssohn's closest friends and colleagues: violinist Ferdinand David, cellist Franz Karl Wittmann, and Mendelssohn himself on the piano. His friend and mentor Robert Schumann was in attendance for the premiere, and Schumann had an experience that can only be described as fangirling, which I hope will have a similar effect on the rest of us after we hear it. He wrote in his public review of the concert, "The storm of recent years is finally beginning to abate, and we must admit that it has washed several pearls ashore. Mendelssohn, as one of the many sons of this age, must have had to struggle with, and often listened to, the insipid declaration of some ignorant critics that the true golden age of music is behind us, although it probably affected him less, and has so distinguished himself that we may well say he is the Mozart of the 19th century, the most brilliant of musicians, the one who most clearly perceives the contradictions of the age and the first to reconcile them." I sort of feel the same way about Beyoncé. Schumann continued, though, "It need hardly be said that the trio is not a piece just for the pianist. The other players also have to play their roles in lively fashion and can count on gaining satisfaction and appreciation. So may the new work be effective from all perspectives, as it should, and may it serve us as evidence of its creator's artistic power, which now appears to be near its full bloom." That's a pretty good review. The artistic power of creators and of performers is truly palpable on this program, which features, not unlike Mendelssohn premiere, 3 rock star musician friends. As Gautier Capuçon says, "When you have the possibility to play incredible music with great friends on stage, this is just pure luxury. There is nothing better than that." There certainly isn't. Thanks for joining us for our first ever episode of Concert Insights here at the Schubert Club. I'm looking forward to seeing you again and enjoying even more music with friends.